Damon Cross had always believed that the most dangerous thing in his life was the possibility of spilling coffee on his quantum processors. As a senior tech specialist for Meridian Industries, his biggest concerns typically involved debugging code and avoiding the awkward small talk that came with office birthday parties. The last thing he expected on a rainy Tuesday morning was to find a woman in a perfectly tailored black suit standing in his apartment hallway, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. "Mr. Cross," she said, her voice carrying the kind of professional coolness that could freeze plasma. "I'm Zara Voss. I've been assigned as your personal security detail." Damon blinked, still holding his morning coffee and wearing pajama pants decorated with tiny spaceships. "My what now? Your bodyguard," Zara clarified. Though the words seemed to leave a bitter taste in her mouth, she was tall, athletic, with short auburn hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. Everything about her posture suggested military training, from the way she scanned his apartment's entry points to how she positioned herself between him and potential threats that existed only in her mind. "There must be some mistake," Damon said, stepping aside reluctantly as she moved past him into his living space. "I design computer systems. I don't need a bodyguard. The most exciting thing that happens to me is when the food printer makes a sandwich without burning the edges." Zara's eyes swept over his apartment with professional efficiency, taking in the scattered tech components, the wall of monitors displaying various code sequences, and the impressive collection of vintage science fiction novels. "According to my briefing, you've recently completed work on Project Nexus. Certain parties consider your knowledge valuable." The mention of Project Nexus made Damon's stomach tighten. He'd spent the last 6 months developing quantum encryption, protocols that could revolutionize interstellar communications. But the project had been classified at the highest levels. Only a handful of people even knew it existed. "How do you know about that?" he asked, setting his coffee down carefully. "It's my job to know," Zara replied, though something flickered across her features too quickly for him to interpret. "The point is, someone wants either you or your work, and my assignment is to make sure they don't get either." Damon studied her more carefully, noting details that seemed inconsistent with a standard corporate security assignment. Her suit was expensive, but not the kind issued by company security. Her shoes were practical but stylish, chosen by someone who understood both function and fashion. Most telling were her hands. They showed calluses consistent with weapons training, but also smaller scars that suggested technical work. "Who exactly do you work for?" he asked. "Meridian Industries contracted my services through an independent security firm," Zara said. But her answer came just a fraction too quickly, like she'd rehearsed it. "And this independent firm is called Classified." The word came out flat, final, but Damon caught something in her expression that looked almost like regret. He moved toward his main workstation, partly to check his morning diagnostic routines and partly to put some distance between himself and the woman who was simultaneously the most attractive and most intimidating person he'd encountered in years. "So let me understand this. Someone I've never met wants to hurt me because of work I can't discuss. And the solution is a bodyguard who won't tell me who she really works for." "That's an accurate summary," Zara said, positioning herself where she could observe both the apartment's entrance and the windows that overlooked the city's transport corridors. "Wonderful," Damon muttered, pulling up his daily schedule on the main display. "How exactly is this supposed to work? Do you follow me everywhere? Do you move in? Do you have opinions about my breakfast choices? I go where you go. I evaluate threats you're not trained to recognize, and your breakfast choices are irrelevant unless someone tries to poison your food." Zara's tone suggested she found the entire situation as uncomfortable as he did. Damon turned to look at her directly. "You don't want this assignment." It wasn't a question, and the way Zara's jaw tightened confirmed his observation. "My personal preferences are irrelevant to the mission parameters." "That's not what I asked." For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across her features before the professional mask slammed back into place. "Mr. Cross, my job is to keep you alive, not to make friends. The sooner we both accept that, the easier this will be for everyone involved." The words stung more than they should have. Probably because Damon found himself genuinely curious about the woman behind the cold efficiency. There was something about her that felt familiar, though he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. Her voice had an accent he couldn't identify, and the way she moved suggested training that went far beyond standard corporate security protocols. "Fine," he said, turning back to his workstation, "but I have projects to complete, and I work better without someone staring over my shoulder." "I'll do my best to be unobtrusive," Zara said, though she didn't sound particularly convinced that discretion was possible given the circumstances. As Damon began his morning routine of checking system diagnostics and reviewing code modifications, he found himself acutely aware of Zara's presence. She positioned herself near the apartment's main window, occasionally speaking into a communication device too quietly for him to overhear. Her attention seemed divided between monitoring external threats and observing him, though she was careful to avoid direct eye contact. The morning passed in uncomfortable silence, punctuated by the occasional beep from his various monitoring systems. Damon tried to focus on his work, but he kept finding himself stealing glances at his unwanted guardian. There was something about the way she carried herself that suggested depths far beyond her professional facade, mysteries that made his naturally curious mind want to dig deeper. Around midday, his building's security system chimed to announce a visitor. Zara was immediately alert, her hand moving toward what Damon now realized was a concealed weapon. "Expecting someone?" she asked, her voice sharp with sudden tension. "My sister," Damon said, checking the building's internal monitors. "Nina. She brings lunch sometimes when she's in the district." But as the elevator doors opened to reveal a woman who looked nothing like the Nina Cross in the building's visitor database, Damon realized that his comfortable, predictable life had just become significantly more complicated. And judging by the way Zara's face went completely white, he wasn't the only one whose world was about to change forever. The woman in the elevator was definitely not his sister, and the way Zara whispered "impossible" suggested that whoever she was, her presence here was about to turn an already strange situation into something far more dangerous. The woman who emerged from the elevator was petite with silver hair and kind eyes, but the moment she saw Zara, her expression shifted to something that looked like recognition mixed with concern. Damon watched the color drain from his bodyguard's face as the stranger approached his apartment door. "Zara," the woman called softly. "Is that really you?" Zara's hand trembled almost imperceptibly before she steadied herself. "You must be mistaken. I don't know you." But even Damon could tell she was lying. The way her voice caught on the denial, the sudden rigidity in her posture, everything about her reaction screamed familiarity and pain. "I'm sorry," the woman said, looking between them with obvious confusion. "I thought you look exactly like someone I used to know. I'm Nina Cross, Damon's sister." Damon stepped forward, his protective instincts kicking in despite his confusion. "Nina, what are you doing here? I thought you were off-world on that archaeological dig." "I came back early," Nina said, though her attention kept drifting to Zara. "There were some complications with the site permits." "Damon, who is this?" "My bodyguard, apparently," Damon said, noting how Zara had positioned herself to keep both the hallway and the apartment's interior in view. Though she's not big on explanations, Nina's eyes widened. "Bodyguard, Damon. What kind of trouble are you in?" Before he could answer, Zara's communication device chirped with an urgent tone. She listened for a moment, her expression growing increasingly grim. "We need to move," she said abruptly. "Now, what's happening?" Damon asked, but Zara was already moving toward his bedroom. "Pack essentials, 2 minutes," she ordered, her professional mask firmly back in place. "Ms. Cross, I need you to leave the building immediately. I'm not going anywhere without my brother," Nina said firmly, crossing her arms in a gesture that reminded Damon of their mother's stubborn streak. Zara paused, conflict clear in her storm gray eyes. "Ma'am, you don't understand the situation." "Then explain it," Nina interrupted. "Because right now, a stranger is telling me to abandon my brother, and that's not happening." The sound of the building's fire alarm suddenly filled the air, followed by the acrid smell of smoke. Zara cursed under her breath, grabbing Damon's arm. "Change of plans," Emergency stairs, now. As they rushed toward the stairwell, Damon caught sight of smoke billowing from the floors below. This isn't a coincidence, is it? No, Zara said grimly, leading them upward instead of down. Someone wants to flush us out into the open. The roof? Nina asked, keeping pace despite her obvious confusion. Extraction point, Zara replied, then spoke rapidly into her calm device in a language Damon didn't recognize. They reached the roof to find a sleek hover vehicle waiting, its engines already spinning. As they climbed aboard, Damon noticed the pilot, a woman with intricate tattoos covering her arms and the kind of augmented eyes that suggested military-grade enhancements. Cutting it close, Voss, the pilot said as they lifted off. Just fly, Kira, Zara replied, but there was warmth in her voice that hadn't been there earlier. As they soared over the city, Damon watched his apartment building grow smaller below them. Smoke was indeed pouring from several floors, though. He noticed that the damage seemed carefully controlled, destructive enough to force evacuation, but not enough to actually endanger lives. Professional job, he observed. Zara glanced at him with something that might have been approval. You're more observant than your file suggested. My file, everyone has a file, cross. The pilot, Kira, called back. Question is whose? Reading yours and why they want you badly enough to stage this kind of operation. Nina, who had been unusually quiet during their escape, finally spoke up. Zara, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. The tension in the small aircraft became almost palpable. Zara's jaw tightened, but she nodded. What happened to Zara Voss? Nina asked softly. The question hit like a physical blow. Zara's composure cracked completely, her hands shaking as she stared at Nina with something that looked like grief and terror combined. What do you mean? Damon asked, looking between the two women. Nina's eyes never left Zara's face. Because Zara Voss died 3 years ago. I was at her funeral. The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of the hover vehicle's engines. Zara looked like she might be sick, while Kira's augmented eyes kept flicking to the rear view display with obvious concern. Nina, Zara finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the engine noise. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be involved in this. But I am involved, Nina said gently. The moment I walked into that hallway and saw my best friend from university standing there alive, when I've spent 3 years mourning her death, Damon felt like the universe had tilted sideways. Wait, you two know each other? We were roommates, Nina said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. We were going to be each other's maid of honor. We had plans to travel the outer colonies together after graduation. And then one day, I got a call saying she'd been killed in a transport accident, and there wasn't even enough left to. She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Zara's face had gone completely white, and she was staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. I'm sorry, Zara said, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Nina. I never wanted you to find out like this. I never wanted you to find out at all. So you are Zara Voss, Damon said, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in his mind, which means someone faked your death. The question is why? Zara looked up at him, and for the first time since they'd met, her expression was completely unguarded, vulnerable, and afraid and heartbreakingly sad. Because 3 years ago, I discovered something I wasn't supposed to know, she said, and the people involved decided it would be easier to kill Zara Voss and create someone new than to deal with the complications. What did you discover? Nina asked. Though her voice suggested she might not want to know the answer, Zara glanced at Kira, who nodded grimly. I found out that my father wasn't the war hero everyone thought he was. I found out that he'd been selling weapons to both sides of the Centauri conflict, and that some very powerful people were profiting from a war that should have ended years earlier. And when you tried to expose them, Damon prompted, they tried to kill me. Kira got me out. But the only way to keep me safe was to let everyone believe they'd succeeded. Zara's eyes met Nina's, including the people I cared about most. The hover vehicle began its descent toward what looked like an abandoned industrial complex on the city's outskirts. As they touched down, Damon realized that whatever he'd been pulled into was far more complicated than corporate espionage or technology theft. So why are you here now? He asked. Why take an assignment protecting me if you're supposed to be dead? Zara's smile was bitter and sad. Because someone connected to my father's old network has taken an interest in your Project Nexus. And the best way to protect you was to make sure I was the one assigned to watch over you. As they climbed out of the aircraft, Nina grabbed Zara's arm. You should have told me. You should have trusted me. I was protecting you, Zara replied. The same way I'm trying to protect your brother now. From who? Damon asked. But before Zara could answer, Kira's augmented eyes suddenly blazed with alert warnings. We've got company, she announced, drawing a weapon that looked far more advanced than standard security equipment. Multiple vehicles, military-grade shielding. Someone tracked us. As armed figures began emerging from vehicles that had surrounded their landing site, Damon realized that his quiet life as a tech specialist was officially over. But as he watched Zara transform from vulnerable woman back into deadly protector, he also realized that he was beginning to understand why his sister had loved her enough to mourn her. For 3 years, the question now was whether any of them would survive long enough for him to tell her so. The abandoned warehouse offered little in the way of defensive positions, but Zara moved through the space like she'd memorized every shadow and sightline. Kira had taken up position near the main entrance, her augmented eyes providing tactical data that she relayed in rapid bursts of technical jargon. Nina and Damon crouched behind a stack of shipping containers. While the sound of approaching vehicles grew steadily louder, 12 hostiles, military formation, energy weapons, Kira reported. They're not here to negotiate. Zara checked her sidearm with practiced efficiency. Nina, there's an emergency tunnel behind the far wall. Take Damon, and I'm not leaving you again, Nina interrupted firmly. I lost you once. I'm not doing it a second time. This isn't a reunion, Zara snapped, though her harsh tone couldn't hide the emotion underneath. These people will kill you just for being here. Damon studied the tactical situation, his mind automatically analyzing problems and solutions the way he approached complex coding challenges. What if we don't have to fight them? Both women looked at him like he'd suggested they surrender immediately. Hear me out, he continued. They want me, right? Or at least they want what I know about Project Nexus. What if I gave them what they wanted? Absolutely not, Zara said immediately. Not the real project, Damon clarified. A decoy. Something that looks like quantum encryption protocols, but is actually designed to trap anyone who tries to use it. Kira's laugh carried a note of appreciation. A honey trap. I like it. But it would take time to set up properly. How much time? Zara asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer wouldn't be good enough. More than we have, Damon admitted as the first of the hostile vehicles came into view through the warehouse's grimy windows. The attack began with a hail of energy blasts that turned the warehouse's main entrance into molten slag. Kira returned. Fire with precision shots that forced the attackers to take cover, but they were clearly outgunned and outnumbered. There's something else, Zara said during a brief lull in the shooting. Something I haven't told you about why I took this assignment. Now might not be the best time for confessions, Nina pointed out as another volley of weapons fire sparked off their makeshift shelter. It's about your father, Zara said, her words directed at both cross siblings. Damon felt the world tilt sideways again. Our father died when we were kids. Transport accident. No, Zara said softly. He didn't. The weapon's fire had stopped, which somehow made the silence more ominous than the attack. Nina's face had gone pale, while Damon struggled to process what Zara was telling them. That's impossible, Nina whispered. We went to his funeral. You saw what you were supposed to see, Zara interrupted gently. Just like everyone saw me die 3 years ago. A voice called out from beyond the warehouse's ruined entrance, amplified by some kind of speaker system. Ms. Voss, we know you're in there. We have a proposition. Zara's grip tightened on her weapon. I'm listening. Your father wants to see you. The words hit like a physical blow. Zara's composure cracked completely, and for a moment she looked like a lost child rather than a trained operative. My father is dead, she called back, though her voice shook with uncertainty. Just like you were dead, the voice replied with cold amusement. Victor Kane sends his regards. Damon saw Zara flinch at the name, and suddenly several pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Victor Kane, he's on the board of directors at Meridian Industries. He's also the one who arranged my supposed death, Zara said grimly. And apparently, he's been lying about a lot more than I realized. The voice from outside continued. Your father has been working on some very interesting projects, Ms. Voss. Projects that require the kind of quantum encryption expertise that Mr. Cross has developed. We're prepared to offer you a reunion in exchange for his cooperation. It's a trap, Kira said immediately. Of course it's a trap, Zara agreed. But it's also the first lead I've had on my father's location in 3 years. Nina reached out to grasp Zara's free hand. Whatever happened to your father, whatever Kane told you, you don't have to face it alone. She's right, Damon added, surprising himself with his certainty. We're already involved. We might as well be involved together. Zara looked between the Cross siblings, her expression cycling through disbelief, gratitude, and fear. You don't understand what you're offering. These people have resources that span multiple star systems. They've been playing games with people's lives for decades. Then it's time someone changed the rules, Damon said, his mind already working on possibilities that combined his technical expertise with the tactical knowledge that Zara and Kira possessed. The negotiation that followed was tense and complicated, conducted through the warehouse's ruined entrance with weapons trained on both sides. Kane's representatives wanted Damon's complete research files on Project Nexus in exchange for a meeting with Zara's supposedly deceased father. Zara wanted proof that her father was actually alive before agreeing to anything. The proof came in the form of a holographic message that materialized in the center of the warehouse, showing a man who bore a strong resemblance to Zara despite the years and hardship that had aged his features. Zara, the hologram said, his voice carrying the weight of profound sadness. If you're seeing this, then Kane has found you. I'm sorry for everything that's happened. I'm sorry for the lies, for letting you believe I was dead, for not being strong enough to protect you from the consequences of my choices. Zara's weapon trembled in her grip as she stared at the image of her father. The work I've been doing for Kane, it's not what I wanted, but it was the only way to keep you safe. Now he's using that work to threaten innocent people, and I can't allow that to continue. There's a way to stop him, but I need your help. And I need the encryption protocols that Mr. Cross has developed. The hologram flickered and stabilized. Come to the coordinates that Kane's people will provide. But be careful, my daughter. Trust is a luxury that neither of us can afford anymore. As the message ended, Zara slowly lowered her weapon. Tears were streaming down her face, and her shoulders shook with suppressed emotion. It could still be fake, Kira said gently. Holographic manipulation is sophisticated these days. No, Zara said softly. That's him. That's really him. She looked up at Damon and Nina. I have to go, but you don't. You could still walk away from this. We're not walking away, Nina said firmly. And you're not going alone. Damon nodded his agreement, then turned toward the warehouse entrance. We'll come with you, he called out to Kane's representatives. But we have conditions. The negotiation that followed established the framework for what would either be a rescue mission or a trap that would get them all killed. As they prepared to leave the warehouse, Zara pulled Damon aside. There's one more thing you need to know, she said quietly, about why Kane is really interested in your project. What about it? It's not just quantum encryption, she said. The protocols you've developed could be used to create unbreakable communication networks across interstellar distances, but they could also be weaponized. Damon felt his blood run cold. Weaponized how? Imagine if someone could intercept and decrypt any communication in the galaxy, Zara said. Government secrets, military plans, personal information, nothing would be private. Kane isn't just interested in making money from your work. He wants to control information itself. As they boarded the transport that would take them to Kane's facility, Damon realized that he wasn't just trying to save Zara's father or protect his own research. He was potentially helping to prevent the creation of a surveillance state that could span the entire known galaxy. The question was whether they were walking into a rescue mission or delivering themselves directly to the enemy. But as he watched, Zara struggled with hope and fear about her father's survival. Damon knew that regardless of the risks, he couldn't let her face this alone. The facility that housed Victor Kane's operations was a masterpiece of corporate camouflage, officially listed as a research station studying deep space mineral formations, but actually serving as a prison and laboratory for projects that existed in the gray areas between legal and catastrophic. As their transport approached the docking bay, Damon found himself analyzing the station's defensive capabilities with the same methodical attention he usually reserved for debugging code. 16 weapons platforms, redundant shielding, and enough firepower to vaporize a small fleet. He observed quietly. "You're learning to think tactically," Zara said, though her attention was focused on the facility's interior layout displayed on their transport's navigation system. "That's either very good or very bad for your long-term survival prospects." Nina, who had been unusually quiet during the 3-hour journey, finally spoke up. "Zara, when we see your father, what if he's not the person you remember?" It was a question that had been hanging unspoken between them since they'd agreed to Kane's terms. 3 years of imprisonment and forced cooperation could change anyone, potentially turning allies into enemies or breaking people in ways that made rescue impossible. "Then we deal with that when it happens," Zara replied, but her voice carried uncertainty that hadn't been there during their earlier crises. The docking process was smooth and professional, which somehow made it more ominous than if they'd been met with obvious hostility. Kane's people were clearly confident in their ability to control the situation, and that confidence suggested resources and preparation that extended far beyond what they'd encountered so far. Victor Kane himself was waiting in the facility's main reception area, a tall man with silver hair and the kind of expensive augmentations that spoke of both wealth and vanity. His smile was warm and welcoming, which made him infinitely more dangerous than if he'd appeared as an obvious villain. "Ms. Voss," he said, approaching Zara with arms extended as if greeting an old friend. "You look remarkable for someone who's supposed to be dead." "Where is my father?" Zara asked, ignoring his gesture and maintaining a careful distance. "Direct, as always," Kane said with apparent amusement. "He's safe and comfortable, working on projects that utilize his considerable expertise in materials engineering. Would you like to see him?" The reunion took place in what Kane described as his father's private workshop, though the armed guards and reinforced walls suggested it was more accurately described as a luxury prison. Professor David Voss looked older than his years, but his eyes lit up with genuine joy and relief when he saw his daughter. "Zara," he said, moving toward her with obvious emotion. "I wasn't sure Kane would actually bring you here alive." "Hello, Dad," Zara replied, her professional composure finally cracking as she embraced him. "I've missed you so much." Damon found himself moved by the reunion despite the circumstances, but he also noticed details that suggested the situation was more complicated than simple. Imprisonment. Professor Voss's workshop was equipped with cutting-edge technology. His living quarters were comfortable, and his health appeared good despite his captivity. "Professor Voss," Damon said, introducing himself. "I'm Damon Cross. Kane seems to think my work complements yours somehow." The older man's expression grew troubled. "Mr. Cross, I want you to understand that anything I've developed here has been under duress. Kane has been very clear about the consequences of non-cooperation." "What kind of consequences?" Nina asked. Kane, who had been observing the reunion with apparent satisfaction, answered for him. "The kind that involve people he cares about. Professor Voss has been remarkably productive since we helped him understand how much his daughter's continued existence depended on his cooperation." The casual threat made Zara stiffen, her hand moving instinctively toward her weapon before she remembered that they were surrounded by Kane's security forces. "Show them what we've been working on." "Professor," Kane continued, "I think they'll find it educational." What Professor Voss revealed over the next hour was both brilliant and terrifying. Using theoretical frameworks from Damon's quantum encryption research, he'd developed communication systems that could not only transmit information across interstellar distances instantly, but also intercept and decode any other quantum encrypted communication in the galaxy. "It's like having a master key," Professor Voss explained, his voice heavy with reluctance, not just to current communications, but to any quantum encrypted system that might be developed in the future. The applications are limitless, Kane added with enthusiasm that made Damon's stomach turn. Government communications, military planning, corporate secrets, personal privacy, all of it becomes accessible to whoever controls this technology. Damon studied the technical specifications with growing horror. This isn't just surveillance. This is the end of privacy for every intelligent species in the galaxy. Privacy is overrated. Kane said dismissively, information wants to be free, and we're simply facilitating that natural process, while making enormous profits from controlling who gets access to that information. Zara observed grimly, business and altruism don't have to be mutually exclusive. Kane replied, we can make money while also bringing order to a chaotic galaxy. Nina, who had been examining the laboratory equipment, with the eye of someone trained in archaeological research methods, suddenly looked up with alarm. This isn't just theoretical, is it? You've already tested it. Professor Voss's expression confirmed her suspicion. 3 months ago, we successfully intercepted and decoded classified military communications from the Andromeda sector. Kane has been using that intelligence to manipulate conflicts throughout the outer colonies. We've been preventing unnecessary wars, Kane corrected smoothly. Conflicts tend to be much shorter when one side has perfect intelligence about their opponents. Plans and capabilities. The scope of what Kane was describing began to sink in. He wasn't just interested in surveillance or profit. He was actively manipulating interstellar politics using stolen intelligence, playing different factions against each other, while positioning himself as the ultimate arbiter of information. How many people have died because of your interventions? Zara asked, her voice deadly quiet. Far fewer than would have died in prolonged conflicts, Kane replied. We're saving lives. Ms. Voss, we're bringing stability to chaos. You're playing God with entire civilizations, Damon said, his anger overriding his usual caution. Kane's expression hardened slightly. Someone has to. The alternative is endless warfare between species that are too primitive to understand the benefits of cooperation. The conversation was interrupted by an alarm that began blaring throughout the facility. Kane's expression shifted from confidence to concern as he activated a communication device. Report, he ordered, sir. We have multiple ships approaching at high velocity. They're not responding to our identification requests, and their weapon signatures match military specifications. Kane's face went pale. How many ships? 15 confirmed, possibly more, sir. They're broadcasting surrender demands on all frequencies, as the facility shuddered under the impact of what sounded like warning shots. Kane turned toward the group with an expression that had shifted from confident authority to desperate calculation. It seems our conversation will have to be postponed, he said. Professor Voss, you and your guests will be transferred to secure holding until the situation is resolved. But before Kane's security forces could move to detain them, Zara had already drawn her weapon, while Kira appeared from a concealment position that none of them had noticed her taking. Actually, Zara said, her voice carrying the cold authority that Damon was beginning to associate with her most dangerous moods. I think our conversation is just getting started, Dad. How quickly can you sabotage your own work? As the battle for control of Kane's facility began in earnest, Damon realized that their rescue mission had just become something far more complex, a race to prevent technology that could reshape galactic civilization from falling into the wrong hands, while avoiding capture by forces whose loyalties remained completely unclear. The question was whether they could destroy Professor Voss's research before Kane could use it to consolidate power over information systems throughout the galaxy, and whether the approaching military forces represented salvation or simply a different kind of threat. The battle for Kane's facility raged for 6 hours, with explosions shaking the research station while Zara, her father, and the Cross siblings worked frantically to destroy 3 years of quantum communication. Research. Professor Voss moved through his laboratory with the methodical precision of someone who understood exactly how to dismantle his own work. while Damon provided technical expertise about quantum encryption vulnerabilities that could be exploited to create cascade failures in the communication systems. The backup servers are in the secured vault 3 levels down, Professor Voss said as he initiated deletion protocols on his primary research files. Kane won't have physical access, but the automated systems will preserve copies unless we can trigger a complete core shutdown. I can handle the technical side, Damon said, his fingers flying across interface panels with the kind of focused intensity that Nina recognized from their childhood. But we'll need someone to physically breach the vault's security. Zara checked her weapon and surveyed the facility's layout on her portable display. Kira and I can get you there. But once we're inside the secured levels, we'll be trapped if Kane's people regain control of the facility. What about whoever's attacking the station? Nina asked, monitoring external communications that were providing conflicting information about the identity of the approaching forces. Are they friendly or just a different kind of enemy? The answer came in the form of a communication that reached them directly, bypassing Kane's internal systems through what sounded like military-grade encryption. This is Admiral Chen of the Galactic Alliance Fleet, a crisp voice announced. We are conducting a lawful enforcement action against Victor Kane for violations of interstellar commerce and communications regulations. Any non-hostile personnel should identify themselves and prepare for evacuation. Professor Voss looked up from his work with surprise. Admiral Chen? She was one of the officers who investigated my supposed death 3 years ago, which means she knows you're alive, Zara said grimly, and she knows Kane has been holding you prisoner. As they made their way through the facility's lower levels, dodging Kane's security forces and avoiding areas damaged by the ongoing battle, Damon found himself thinking about how dramatically his life had changed in the space of a few days. The quiet routine of his technical work had been replaced by running battles, corporate conspiracies, and the kind of moral choices that would have seemed impossible from the safety of his apartment. Zara, he said during a brief pause while they waited for Kira to disable a security checkpoint. After this is over, what happens to us? What do you mean? She asked, though her expression suggested she understood the question's implications. I mean, once we've stopped Kane and destroyed the research, what happens between us? Do you disappear again? Do you go back to being officially dead? Zara's smile was sad and complicated. I don't know. For 3 years, I've been focused on survival and finding my father. I haven't thought much about what comes after. Well, start thinking about it, Nina said firmly. Because you're not disappearing again. I don't care what kind of legal complications that creates. The vault that contained the backup research data was a masterpiece of corporate paranoia. Multiple layers of physical and electronic security, redundant power systems, and automated defenses that would activate if anyone attempted unauthorized access. But Kane's security measures had been designed to keep intruders out, not to prevent authorized users from destroying their own work. Professor, Damon said as they reached the vault's main interface, your access codes will get us inside, but once we start the deletion process, how long before Kane's people realize what we're doing? Minutes, Professor Voss replied grimly. Maybe less. The system will alert security the moment we begin accessing files marked for permanent destruction. What followed was the most intense technical challenge Damon had ever faced, racing against time and security protocols to systematically destroy research that represented years of theoretical breakthrough while ensuring that no recoverable data remained in backup systems. His fingers moved across quantum interfaces with practiced precision, while Professor Voss provided guidance about the research architecture, and Zara monitored their surroundings for approaching security forces. Got it, Damon announced as the final deletion protocols completed their execution. Every file, every backup, every theoretical framework, it's all gone. But their celebration was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps in Kane's voice echoing through the facility's communication system. Very impressive, he said, his tone carrying disappointment rather than anger. Though I should mention that destroying the research data doesn't actually solve your problem. What do you mean? Zara called out, positioning herself between her father and the vault's entrance. I mean that the research was never the real asset. Kane replied, "The real asset is Professor Voss himself. His knowledge can't be deleted, and there are people who would pay considerable sums for access to that knowledge." The implication was clear, even with the research destroyed. Professor Voss would remain a target for anyone interested in developing quantum surveillance systems. His expertise made him valuable, and that value made him dangerous to possess and dangerous to release. "Then we make sure he's protected," Damon said firmly. "Admiral Chen's forces are here. The Galactic Alliance can provide security. The Galactic Alliance has its own intelligence services," Kane pointed out. "What makes you think they won't be just as interested in Professor Voss's capabilities as I was?" It was a valid concern, and one that had occurred to all of them during their escape from the vault. The approaching Alliance forces might represent rescue, but they could also represent a different kind of imprisonment, official rather than criminal, but potentially just as restrictive. The resolution came from an unexpected source as they reached the facility's main docking bay, where Alliance forces were establishing control and evacuating non-combatant personnel. Admiral Chen herself approached them with an expression that suggested she'd been expecting their arrival. "Professor Voss," she said, her voice carrying both relief and concern. "We've been looking for you for 3 years, Admiral," Professor Voss replied cautiously. "I hope you understand that my research was conducted under duress." "We understand completely," Admiral Chen assured him, "which is why the Alliance Council has approved a rather unusual arrangement. What she proposed was both simple and revolutionary. Rather than classifying Professor Voss's knowledge or restricting his freedom, the Alliance would support his establishment of an independent research institute dedicated to developing quantum communication systems with built-in privacy protections. Instead of creating surveillance technology, he would work on systems that made surveillance impossible. "Think of it as the opposite of what Kane wanted," Admiral Chen explained. "Instead of master keys that unlock all communications, you'd be developing locks that can't be picked." "And my legal status?" Zara asked. "Ms. Voss was declared legally dead based on falsified evidence," Admiral Chen said. "Correcting that error is simply a matter of paperwork, though she might find that her expertise in security matters makes her valuable as a consultant for the new institute." As they boarded the Alliance transport that would take them away from Kane's facility, Damon found himself sitting beside Zara as she processed the possibility of a future that didn't involve hiding or running. "So," he said quietly, "independent research institute, legitimate work, no more fake identities. What do you think?" "I think," Zara said, reaching for his hand with a gesture that was both tentative and hopeful, "that it sounds like the kind of life I used to dream about before everything became complicated." "Good," Damon replied, interlacing their fingers, "because I've been thinking about making some career changes myself. Something involving more travel, more interesting colleagues, and considerably more excitement than debugging quantum processors." Nina, who had been listening to their conversation with obvious satisfaction, leaned over from her seat across the aisle. "Just promise me that whatever you do decide to do together, you'll occasionally remember to visit family who worry about you." "Deal," Zara said, her smile brighter than Damon had ever seen it. "Though I should warn you that our family dinners might be more interesting than what you're used to." 6 months later, the Voss Institute for Quantum Communications Privacy occupied a small but well-equipped facility on the edge of Alliance space, where Professor Voss led a team of researchers developing communication systems that prioritized security and privacy over surveillance capabilities. Zara served as the Institute's head of security, a role that utilized her tactical expertise while allowing her to protect research that could benefit entire civilizations. Damon had accepted a position as the Institute's chief technical officer, finding that his encryption expertise translated well to developing systems designed to resist rather than enable surveillance. His work was more challenging and more meaningful than anything he'd accomplished in corporate research, and his partnership with Zara had evolved into both a professional collaboration and a personal relationship that surprised him with its depth and stability.